we're using predominantly a more Japanese approach, you are reducing the risk that people just get caught up in the day-to-day whirlwind of being busy. Everyone was trying to copy the Toyota way. And actually, if you look at who's most successful now, it's still the Americans. The West has learned from the Japanese best practice. But, for some reason, perhaps some of the Asian economies, well, certainly Japan, have not learned from the West. As an organization, have 3 goals, not 10, right? So not everyone needs to be involved. Spend more time on agreeing the key results rather than some made-up rating scale. I understand that Apple use OKRs with a major focus on driving innovation.
Hello and welcome to a fantastic episode of Joy of Performing. This is our internal podcast from Joy of Performing company, which is an OKR platform. The reason we started this podcast was to bring amazing voices to talk about the importance of OKR. Today, our guest is beyond OKR. His wealth of expertise spans bringing companies to IPO, turning companies around. He's out and out an executive management expert. We have with us Grant Crow, who's currently co-founder and non-executive director at Joy of Performing, our OKR company, and he's managing director at 3T Transform, a company which has transform in its name. So they are a technology-led learning provider, and they help with compliance. Well, Grant has several decades of experience in turning companies around, in working in several domains. His mind is wired for frameworks, and I thoroughly enjoyed learning about him. Let's bring him on. Let's get to know why Grant supports OKR, why he supports this mission, and what is his most amazing and fascinating journey sound like. Grant, welcome to Joy of Performing podcast. We are truly privileged and honored to have you here.
Thank you so much, Vida. Listening to that introduction, I think I should hire you as my PR agency.
I'm always ready to work for you. I'm thoroughly impressed with your profile. So let's get started. Let's learn more about your amazing background. What struck me was you were born in South Africa and then you moved to UK, and now you're working for an Indian company and you understand the US market. Essentially, you're a citizen of the world. You wear many hats and you have many perspectives. Tell us how you started this journey which led you to Joy of Performing or job, and what was it like when you IPO'd a company in South Africa? What was your initial stint like, and what brought you to UK?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are quite a few questions that you've asked in that question. I'll try and sort of pick them off one by one if I can. My business journey started in a company called Woolworths, which is kind of the Marks and Spencer's equivalent in South Africa. And my first roles there were in HR. So HR has really been, and people management has been at the core of what I've done since early career. Having spent a few years there, I joined a guy called Professor Andy Andrews, who was very much the doyen of executive education in South Africa. He was running the biggest and the best business school at the time. And together we created the first private graduate school of business in South Africa by essentially importing a UK executive MBA qualification to offer more choice to South Africans who were beginning to look more outside the country, at doing business more internationally, perhaps being more mobile internationally as well. And that business went well. And then after about 5 years, I decided to replicate that, and I'd met some very credible Black business guys in South Africa. We tended to do quite a lot of work at board level in terms of corporate governance and so on. Kagiso Trust were a very credible business that were quite closely aligned with the ANC at the time. So the then chief executive, Eric Malobi, and I, we completed a joint venture and created the Kagiso Leadership School, which was really focused on helping emerging managers move into managerial positions, many of which for the first time, sometimes at very senior positions. So, as democracy was arriving, there was the need to sort of redress the imbalance between how people of different colors were being treated. So historically, under the apartheid government, only the white guys got the decent opportunities. And in fact, it was an intentional strategy of the then apartheid government to badly educate anyone who was not white. Crazy kind of, way of doing things. So there was quite a lot, there was a huge challenge in terms of trying to address the balance, trying to move people who hadn't had opportunities into positions of authority, decision-making, and trying to speed up their education to enable them to be successful to do that. And that's really what the leadership school focused on. And, we had some great successes with various government and commercial organizations in building, stronger leadership across the population base. So we're very proud of what we did there. We were probably one of the first in South Africa. Now it's very common. It's called BEE, which is Black Economic Empowerment. And, certain businesses of certain sizes have got to have a certain percentage of Black shareholders to sort of spread the wealth. But I'm very proud of the fact that we were probably one of the first. It's going back to 1995, probably, 96. And we sorry.
I want to ask you, what was it like empowering people to take on managerial roles? Looks like this was your stint into understanding how people work, how teams work, what it takes to manage a team. You kind of solidified your foundations. So what was it like building that curriculum? How did that shape you to get you ready for something like OKR?
Well, I'm not sure there was that much learning for me from the Kagiso experience in terms of OKRs, because obviously skills is a really important part of the whole execution journey. I mean, you can have very clear goals, you can have very clear ways of measuring those goals, you can empower people, but if they are not people that you can empower, if they lack the skills and the experience to be empowered, then you've got a problem. So I think that's where the skills component comes in. So, but it didn't really inform my thinking around why strategy execution is important. It was more a kind of a deep understanding of the challenges of getting people up to speed quickly to take on roles that they hadn't been prepared for.
Yeah, fantastic. Go ahead. And now you're talking about your journey to UK.
Yeah, so at the time, my wife had worked in the Netherlands, she'd worked in the UK in the NHS, and she'd worked in New York. And we were living, comfortably in Cape Town. And, we kind of sat down and thought about our future. And she said, it's one thing traveling a lot, but it's another thing living in another country.
Yeah.
And my father was born in Britain. So I had the ability, I had the passport to come across here. So we decided to change. And, the plan was to come for 5 years, but many people have come to London thinking they're coming for 5 years, and then that's the rest of their life gone. So, the kind of level of opportunity in the UK, level of competition, the exposure, the UK in many ways is such a hub. It makes it a very attractive destination.
Yeah, fantastic. So, I was extremely impressed by one of your personal experiences where you took on the role of CEO and, you turned a company around. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I guess, when we got to the UK, I fell into software. Yeah. I'd never been in software before. I'd been very much people development. Yeah. And I met a German entrepreneur, and we together completed a joint venture for the UK market with his software, and that was very successful. And since then, I've been in a range of sectors and roles. I mean, the one organization I think you might be referring to, Vida, was a company called iNexus, where I was chief executive for 5 years. When I entered the organization, I quite quickly, based on feedback from customers, realized that it was probably not well positioned for growth.
Yeah.
We had to fix a lot of basic problems, things like technical debt in the solution.
Yeah.
The culture around supporting and really helping our customers to be successful wasn't really there. So that involved really probably a year to a year and a half turnaround, after which we were then able to grow. And I've had a couple of examples of turnarounds that are either in most cases linked to growth afterwards, but you've got to actually execute on the turnaround first to create the foundation for growth.
Right. So I think somewhere like this, having something like OKRs really helps. I don't know if you were using OKRs at that point, but
No. Sorry, Vida, I'm interrupting you.
Yeah, go ahead. No. But I feel that was kind of like a visibility for you into what it's like to run a software company, number one. Second, you're moving from a people-centric role, you are working with people, understanding management, and now you move to the role of a CEO where it's more execution. So now your personality is fairly well-rounded. You understand the people aspect, the execution aspect. And for turning around, I believe you would have learned a lot about strategy as well, right?
Yep, correct. Yeah. I mean, I think my wife would probably argue about the point that my personality is well-rounded, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah. No, wives, it's very hard to please the wife, but I mean, as long as you please the board, I think it should do the job.
Actually, no, I mean, I joke about that, but one of the learning points for me, and linking back to your OKR question, is that she works in the National Health Service and has done for many years in the UK. And once a year, over the dinner table, she'll say, I've got my performance review tomorrow.
Yes.
And I'll go, okay. And she'll say, but actually the problem is I can't remember what my goals were. I'm going to have to dig out that email or whatever we agreed were the goals, because you know how it works with large organizations when you've got the mindset of performance management being a kind of an annual set of goals, but everything is so changeable and dynamic and agile these days that notion is just ridiculous. So, you go there and sit down with your boss and you kind of both pretending that this is a useful exercise, right?
Absolutely. I have been through that and I totally agree with you. So, let's make life for, for people like your wife and for me easier. Let's talk more about how you got to solve this problem through job. What got you into this space? You're already working at 3D Transform, and still you decided to come in as a non-executive director and a co-founder at Job. So why did you, start vouching for an OKR platform? What was
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think, my time at iNexus is very much about strategy execution, working with complex, large global businesses. Some of the brand names were amazing, like Pfizer, ABB, Novartis, really sort of global well-known companies.
I want to ask you this. Don't you get overwhelmed when you're thrown in the thick of things for a third, you're coming in as a third party, and with names like Pfizer, it gives me like goosebumps. Didn't you feel overwhelmed? How did this OKR kind of
actually with them at iNexus, we were not using OKRs, but it was the start of my journey to understand how important strategy execution is, with the focus on execution. Because I think, for a long while now, the actual process of putting together a strategy, if you're smart enough and you got to, you involve the right people and you do your right research, you're going to kind of come up with a good strategy in most cases. But the realization that the ability to execute on the strategy is almost certainly what determines who the winners are and the losers are. Now, with iNexus, we were supporting those brand names, and I mean, people like Nestle were also customers, where we were using predominantly a more Japanese approach, which was called Hoshin Kanri, a very structured Japanese approach to execution, looking over a 5-year period and then breaking those down into shorter cycles and so on. And, there was a decent market for that. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt that the actual world that we live in now, with the increased agility and disruption and kind of like less ability to plan forward, it's more about building competence to be more agile so you can respond quicker than other people, rather than trying to predict the future, which I think is probably, a fairly, you can waste a lot of time doing that. So I started with iNexus understanding that execution is so critical, and that often determines who wins and who doesn't win. But the more I started, then I started hearing about OKRs and where they'd come from, and how the likes of Google and other leading organizations were using them. And I've always had the sense of maybe linking back to the people side of things, is that who's going to execute, right? It's not a plan that's going to execute. It's your people that are going to execute, right? So they need to be empowered. They need to have the right skills. And if they are equipped to execute, then you've got a much better chance of doing that. So the OKR, I think, framework to me supports empowerment. Is you're giving people a sense of direction. You're giving them a very clear sense, with goals kind of not in front of their nose, but you're not kind of saying these are for this year. You're giving them these are for this month, or this is for this quarter. So you are reducing the risk that people just get caught up in the day-to-day whirlwind of being busy. And OKRs help people to focus on what they have to get done today to satisfy customers and their boss and other team members and what have you, but also ensures that every week or every, whatever, but regularly, they are also focusing on the longer term stuff, which tends to get neglected if you don't have the right framework.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the secret sources for success of a startup is a razor sharp focus on what they're doing. It seems startups are always, they have a resource crunch. There are few people with less resources trying to do more. So it only helps them if they're razor sharp focused. And seems like your approach with OKRs, as you describe it, is an excellent way to execute strategy, even at a startup level. But I would say that for large organizations as well, because large organizations have a different challenge. They have a long-term vision and a short-term vision. And they also, this whole aspect of employee engagement, as you grow larger, the interpersonal interactions become very complicated. And I feel OKRs help those things get sorted out. You mentioned about Hoshinkari, and it seems like a Japanese technique, and you understand OKR very well. It's a very Western methodology. Do you think OKRs or the Western methodologies work better in certain contexts compared to the Japanese methodology, or how do you compare and contrast them?
I guess I'm not an expert on the area, but you might remember, you're probably too young for this, but in the 80s and 90s, there was a guy called Tom Peters who was he came from one of the top consulting companies, and he did all of these talks, and he charged a lot of money for them, and he created all these video kind of.
Yes, I listened to him.
Do you remember? Okay.
Yes,
so,
yes.
And at the time, the Japanese economy was really powering ahead. Everyone was trying to copy the Toyota way. And actually, if you look at who's most successful now, it's still the Americans. And so there's been a problem, I think, I guess the West has learned from the Japanese best practice, but for some reason, perhaps some of the Asian economies, or certainly Japan, have not learned from the West. And I think the rigidity, what I regard as the rigidity within the Hoshinkanri, I mean, that's just a very specific example of a Japanese kind of process around execution, but it does come across as rigid. And I know that some CEOs that we dealt with or try to sell to, if you like, get them kind of interested in it, felt it was too rigid. Whereas OKRs is much more supportive of an agile way of working. And I think because of the fact that it kind of originated in tech, Intel, and then was picked up quickly by Google and so on, it had to be, because that's what they needed, right?
So fantastic. Is there a specific instance where you feel that OKRs can be used in an agile way? To me, what I see an OKR methodology is you have like a master goal, and then you have smaller goals branching out of it, and then they're translated to the individual level. And then there's another thread which goes, it is the 5-yearly, the yearly, the quarterly, the monthly, the weekly. So there are larger goals, smaller goals, and then they're translated at the people level with different timelines. This is my understanding of OKRs. However, how do you think such a complex framework can be modified to be agile? Can you go and change those goals? Can you go and update these goals regularly? What is the OKR platform like, when you mean to say it's agile?
Yeah, I mean, I would not advocate setting OKRs over a 5-year period, and I don't know of anyone that does. So I did an OKR master program with an organization called Vida Vidyangi Patil, who are doing quite a lot of training and consulting in the space globally, but they're based out of the UK. They definitely do not advocate more than annual objectives. So their kind of core process is annual objectives, and then cascading those, breaking those down into quarterly objectives, and building up by quarter to achieve the annual. Right. So that's the max level of complexity they would typically advise on. Right. At Transform, for example, I mean, we're part of the 3T group. That's how we do it. We do annual objectives, quarterly objectives, and the quarterly objectives are owned by cross-functional teams, which helps from a variety of perspectives. We don't go to the individual level. Certain companies do, but just the whole process of making sure that, if you think about what OKRs are focused on, they are focused on the things that are most important. And one of the key OKR principles is don't do everything. Just focus on the things that are really going to make a difference. So as an organization, have 3 goals, not 10, right? So not everyone needs to be involved in the OKRs, because by definition, you've selected out, you've got rid of, or you've not selected some less important goals. That doesn't mean that those goals are not being dealt with maybe at a functional level or a country level or a team level. Yeah. So, at any point in time, you might have 30% or 20% of the people of employees within the group that are involved in OKRs. But, what about the rest of them? Everyone's still, as an individual, you still need direction. You still need a sense of goals, but they're more goals that have to do with the basic essence of what your team exists to do. It's not so much about the goals that are going to make the massive difference. But of course, next quarter, that might change. As an individual, you might then be pulled into an OKR team if you've got the skills and if it covers the areas that you can contribute to.
Yeah, this is amazing. So just by your this particular conversation, this particular explanation, I can imagine that OKRs are meant for different kinds of organizations. So they're not only meant for organizations where OKRs can be used for top level and mid-level management, but also organizations where you want to involve even the grassroots level employee. You can involve the whole chain of management. So it's a pretty flexible, a platform, and I think it's agile because you have annual and quarterly goals. So if things change on a quarterly basis, you have the ability to adjust and make small changes here and there. Is that right?
Correct. So there's nothing to stop you. In fact, if let's say as a team you agree on a quarterly objective, a quarterly OKR, so objective, and then the key results that are pushing towards the annual objective.
Right.
And then something happens in the business where that annual objective is no longer relevant.
Right.
You just kill it, right?
Yeah.
Or the annual objective is still relevant, but you realize that you misinterpreted or you've got some of the key results wrong. The way that you're measuring the outcome of the action is wrong. You just change it, and the sooner you do that, the better.
Yeah.
And because you in sort of weekly stand-ups with the other members of the OKR team, if you're seeing that something's not working, as a team, you decide to change it. No one's going to tell you not to change it, right? Yeah. So as long as you feel that you're driving towards the higher level OKR and that the changes make sense, people need to be empowered to do that. So so you make changes at a variety of levels. The easiest changes are your actions, because every week your actions change. Typically, you could change your key results if it's only when the rubber hits the road that you go, that key result, we thought we were going to measure the impact this way, but we can't. We don't have the data, or it's not that meaningful. We thought it would be useful, but it's not. So let's find another more useful measure. So the learning is almost built into the process. And as long as the team is running itself well, those changes should be incorporated frequently.
Yeah, so Grant, that's an amazing way to explain agility. I really like this particular explanation. And this has, brought in a couple of questions in my mind. The first thing is, what is the connection between OKR and performance management? Because I feel if you have an ability to see the goals and how a team or an individual is progressing towards a goal, there's also this element of employee performance, which kind of starts becoming visible. Did this employee meet the goal or not? Or did this manager meet the goal for his team or not? So, and then there is a sense of, you are getting into employee engagement here. Are we as a management having a good employee engagement from our company? We get a sense of all these things. So do you think OKR and performance management are married together, or do you want to keep those separate? What is your take on it? At least what happens at job?
Yeah. I think traditionally the philosophies behind OKR and traditional performance management have differed widely.
Okay.
And I remember one example where our chief executive was talking with a partner in the US who were very interested in our OKR capability and job. And then he showed them our performance management, our traditional performance management capability, which was about goals for individuals, and then a review at the end of a period, and maybe a rating or what have you. And they got almost quite angry because this was such a difference to their philosophy. They kind of, in their minds, they couldn't marry up OKRs with traditional performance management. But I think the problem is not so much that I believe that they can fit well together. It's just how you do the individual performance management. It can't be the situation I described around my wife earlier, where it's once a year with a review. I can see why someone would get angry if you're trying to put OKRs together with that kind of thing. But if you put it together, there's no reason why, as an individual, rather than setting annual objectives, make them quarterly. OKRs put a lot of emphasis on stating an objective in a clear way, in a certain way. Normally they say the objective should state the what and the why. And then the key results would be the outcomes. There's no reason why at an individual level you can't set goals for someone like that. Do you have a review where the manager reviews and the individual reviews? I don't personally, I don't like that. Why don't you just agree key results that speak for themselves? So spend more time on agreeing the key results rather than some made up rating scale, and it should be obvious if the key results are good, if the person has achieved those or not. So in a way, then it sounds like the individuals are doing OKRs at an individual level because you're using the principles of clearly stated objectives and clearly stated key results. The difference, I would say, though, is that I would break the link between team and then cascading to individual OKRs. So from a strategic perspective, take it down to the team level, but use the principles of writing good objectives that OKRs are so good at to set individual objectives for an individual within a team. And those objectives might have nothing to do with the super important OKRs that the business is trying to achieve.
Yeah, this is very interesting. The last bit you just talked about how important writing skills can be, because you're positioning an OKR at an individual level, and there should be that kind of granularity and clarity. This is a typical positioning problem. At every level, this positioning is so important, the way you word it. Because in Google, from what I know firsthand, some of my closest peers work there. People who have better writing skills are able to articulate their work in a better way. They get better reviews. That is first thing. Now, if you move out of that and if you look at how startups are positioning themselves, it's all about how they word their goals, their quarterly goals or their annual goals when they're raising funding. For them, it's like a really large OKR. So at every level, this ability to write and articulate becomes so important, I think.
Yeah. What I completely agree. I would say writing the objective is easier than writing the key results, in my experience.
Why do you say that? Can you explain more?
Because it's kind of, let's say you got a customer success issue.
Yeah.
And your customers don't like you for whatever reason. Let's say your software is clunky or you got a lot of technical debt, right?
Yeah.
So it would be relatively easy to write an objective that talks about, to improve, let's say the customer experience. That's the what,
yeah.
And the why, so that we can turn them into advocates.
Yeah.
That's the what and the why, and it's quite straightforward.
Yeah.
Now, actually, customer success might not be such a good example because there's so many good ways of measuring how you're doing with your customers, like NPS. You could measure the number of advocates that you have currently, and go, we want to, 50% of our customers are currently advocates, or 10%. We need to make that to X.
Right.
But what is difficult with key results is if you are in an environment where those things are not currently measured, so you don't have a baseline.
Right.
And if you listen to the Heavy Giants, the guys who did the master coaching, OKR coaching I mentioned earlier, they'll talk about leading and lagging OKRs. Mm-hmm. And then the worst, those are the kind of ideal ones, and they prefer lagging as an indicator. Mm-hmm. But then they talk, but if you don't have those measures, you have to put a project in place to create a baseline. So the first quarter or what have you that you're doing those OKRs, you don't have a baseline. You've got to put a baseline into place. So they then talk about like project-based key results. So a key result could be the completion of a certain set of activities to get to a point. So 20% completion is we've sent the following communication to our customers. 40% is this. So I've just noticed that people are not good at writing objectives, and they struggle even more when it comes to agreeing key results and writing good key results. And often you'll find that you'll go halfway through a quarter and you'll go, these key results don't hold up to scrutiny. We should have thought more about them. At the time, they felt like the right thing, but actually they're not,
That's an extremely good insight. That brings me to one question I'm struggling with. How do you differentiate between key results and KPIs? Because, I was talking to another gentleman. He runs a software company, a few weeks ago. And then he says, we try to keep KPIs and key results separate. And we want to work with OKRs, and we want to have our own version of OKRs. So I was like, what did he mean when he said that? Keep the KPIs and KRs separate. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I do, and it's actually something that comes up quite often. To me, the key results are specifically around the measurement of the outcomes of the objectives in the OKRs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for each, best practice says that for each objective, you should probably have between 2 and 4 key results.
Mm-hmm.
And those key results should either be lagging or
Mm-hmm.
leading.
Right.
So you've got, like, let's say you've got in the business 3 or 4 OKRs for the year.
Okay.
Each of those will have between 2 and 4 key results.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 20 things. Or if you got, let's say you got five OKRs, at max you're measuring 20 key results,
Mm-hmm.
right,
Mm-hmm.
for the year. But within certainly a complex business, there are many other KPIs that tell you about your general health of the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the key results are telling you about progress and impact that your specific initiatives are making.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas your KPIs are telling you, hopefully in real time, the rest of the business, the other stuff that's also important, but that's not necessarily being focused on in the OKRs for this period. How are you doing there? So I don't see them as being mutually exclusive at all. I think they're just measuring different things.
Fantastic. So is there a way to marry them together? Like, is there a way that OKRs can be used to represent the success in certain KPIs? Can OKR be like a unit of measurement of success of certain KPIs?
Well, what you might do, I guess, is, let's say you've got a problem with a certain KPI.
Right.
Let's say that KPI might be MRR growth or ARR growth, and KPIs are there, and generally, the trend is going in the wrong direction, or it's flat, and it's not showing enough growth according to the shareholders or senior leadership or whatever. That sometimes I think a KPI, an underperformance in a KPI, is the source of an OKR.
Yeah.
So you'll go, guys, this is a problem. We are not growing as fast as we need to. We need an OKR on this. So that KPI it's highlighted a problem, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's one way of looking at it. I'm sure there are others, but I can't think of it at this point.
That's a great way of putting it. So now I have more clarity on the subtle nuances between KRs and KPIs. So with that, Grant, I was just wondering if you ever thought about an organization or a big brand which did OKRs very well, and you thought like, oh wow, they're getting it right. Did you feel that at any point? Let's say you looked at a Google or a Cisco or any company like that in your personal experience.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you a bit about our experience at 3T. I mean, obviously, look at large companies. Everyone talks about Google. I mean, I know that at Apple, Tim Cook is an advocate of OKRs, and I understand that Apple use OKRs with a major focus on driving innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess when it comes to innovative companies, Apple would probably be number one, or certainly in the top 3 in the world on anyone's list.
Absolutely.
Jeff Weiner from LinkedIn, I think he's moved on, but he credited the company's success on the implementation of the OKR framework.
He was very popular.
Yeah, so yeah, that's pretty cool. From a transform perspective, we've innovated. I've been in role for a year and a half now. One of the things we started doing last year was, when we first implemented the framework, was including some of our customers, in particular larger customers, and at times customers who were less than satisfied with the offer and the way the overall customer experience. So not only did we have cross-functional teams internally within the group working on the OKRs, for our CS oriented OKRs, we actually also had customer reps joining the stand-ups and so on.
Wow.
And we were quite immature at the time. This is probably in our second cycle, so our second quarter. But within a quarter, 2 of the 3 customers that we had in our OKRs, there was no need to involve them anymore. So it had a pretty immediate impact.
Fantastic. So that was such an amazing conversation we had, Grant. I really want to thank you for all your insights in this podcast segment. Any parting thoughts as we wrap up the podcast? Any parting thoughts about where job is with respect to OKRs and how job differentiates itself compared to other players in the space?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Job has done well is obviously the company was born in India, in Delhi. We've developed, Vibhu as the CTO and product lead, has developed a very usable, easy to use, doesn't need any training. It looks great, simple to use. So that's real strength. We're currently working pretty hard on, bridging across some of the stuff we were discussing, like OKRs and performance management, because I think with our home market being in India, we need to be successful there. And whilst there's a growing demand for OKRs, everyone is doing performance management. And of course, if you sell performance management licenses, you're selling more licenses than if you're just selling OKRs. So finding the right balance between the two is important. We also have the capability around, delivering surveys, feedback. We've been using that at Transform, where we use that to reinforce the culture, where we were able to configure our own badges that represent our own values at Transform in Job. And then if someone wants to allocate a badge, when they see a colleague doing something really cool that is aligned with those values, they can do that. And we've kind of put in incentives around that as well. So yeah, I think getting the balance right between performance management and making that quite seamless and OKRs is probably the key to the success for Job.
Fantastic. On that note, Grant, I really want to thank you for this amazing hour you spent with us, and I'd love to see more insights from you. And I'm very fortunate to be working for Job. Look forward to a great stint of progress in the next few months at Job. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Vida. All the best.
Thank you. Yeah.